feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled TIFF review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck. Alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Merchin.
Hey Matt, it's day 2 of the film festival, the Toronto International Film Festival. It's time to either sink or swim. Let's do this thing.
Today we are reviewing the 2022 Toronto International Film Festival opening night film, The Swimmers, a Netflix film that will be released in November.
Yeah,
right?
in the fall of this year. And it was interesting going to the opening night screening of this film.
We did both opening night films last night, which was the Midnight Madness and the official opening night film.
Yeah, and we went to the second screening, which was at 8 p.m.
At Roy Thompson Hall.
And it wasn't as packed as you would think a screening like that would be.
Right.
And I know that like it's a film that doesn't maybe have, big name stars or maybe the kind of pedigree that you'd expect kind of an opening night film to have, but usually a film like that, given the subject matter, the place and time, its relevancy, it's something that you would expect more people to kind of come out and support, and even Cameron Bailey has been really kind of pushing this one quite a bit in terms of he really likes this movie a lot.
I think the double premiere, both being at Princess of Wales and Roy Thompson Hall, maybe is part of that. And I know that they hold a lot of those Roy Thompson Hall tickets for sponsors and different things like that. But we were up in the third level, the highest level, and there were some large chunks of the audience kind of missing. I don't know, maybe the Princess of Wales one is the one that they really kind of cram. It's to the brim, but who knows. But today we are here to talk about the movie, which is based on a true story about
the Mardini sisters, Yrsa and Sarah, and how they flee war-torn Syria for Germany to live a better life. And Yrsa specifically has ambitions to compete in swimming for the Olympics in Rio in 2016, because the majority of the story takes place the year before in 2015. We do get a kind of prologue sequence when they're younger and at a point where they're still coming of age and realizing the circumstances and the politics and sort of the relationship that they have to the world, and also sort of the war-torn country that they're kind of living in, and sort of the clashing with Russia and things like that. So there's a lot going on in this movie, and it's part social political drama. It's an inspirational sports movie, but that kind of feels a little bit tacked on. It's also a more digestible movie about what's going on in the world right now, and kind of that didactic quality of making you feel something in a emotionally manipulative kind of manner, to the point where it does lay certain sequences on very thick. I do feel that the best sequence of the film, and when it really does start to work and when you are kind of invested in the story, is the harrowing sequence of the sisters and their cousin leaving Turkey via this makeshift raft and surviving on the Greek Sea and making it to Greece. We've seen a lot of refugee crisis movies sort of depicting similar subject matter, whether it be films that took place in the 80s, specifically about documentaries like Flee last year. Actually, one character in this was leaving Kabul in Afghanistan, so it reminded me of that a little bit. There's a really great documentary called Fire at Sea, which was released a few years ago, that's more of a kind of observational, fly on the wall kind of experience of seeing refugees come to Greece, and then also looking at sort of people living in Lesbos, and sort of just kind of like how the two worlds collide, and how and when they acknowledge each other and when they don't. So I highly recommend those movies. There's an amazing film called His House, which is also available on Netflix, which is a horror movie that
last
also
year, right?
has refugees coming from parts of Africa and surviving on boat, and then feeling the guilt of being a survivor and living in the UK, which is a really powerful piece of filmmaking. This is one of those films where it will be easy to recommend to kind of a more mainstream crowd that maybe doesn't want something that's too visceral or unpleasant, quote unquote,
upsetting or anything like that.
That will also make them feel good for watching it. And I don't mean to make this sound like a slight to the film or the crew, but it does have a very kind of
Hollywood or
middle brow kind of approach to the material, to the point where like I'm really starting to get sick of like slow motion sequences depicting moments of happiness. There's one moment before the two girls leave their family and they're trying to catch this bird that they have in their room with their younger sister, and like they slow it down.
That's
and
just bad. The use of some pop music is not great either.
No.
Like Bulletproof is it like that song is corny. Like there are a bunch of corny moments, but like it's a totally fine movie, right? Like, and I think we are both in agreement with that. It's a movie that you said you would recommend to basically anyone, and to me it's like my parents. So like, which I think both sounds sort of like a slight towards the movie, but I don't mean it as a slight, because I think these movies are totally fine to exist, and they exist on Netflix for that reason. And I think like it's a movie that my mom would either randomly watch on Netflix and message me asking if I've seen it, and said, oh, my dad and I watched this movie. Mike and I watched this movie. Have you seen it yet? And I'd go, oh yeah. Or I would tell them, hey, there's this movie called The Swimmers on Netflix. You guys should watch it, because I know that that's the type of crowd that this movie is kind of made for. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with the movie. Like, and I agree with you that there is a great sequence halfway through or so, which is the sequence Eric already mentioned about them traveling across to Greece on this little dinghy that's all patched up with duct tape and stuff like that.
And it's a completely packed boat as water's leaking in, and the motor of the boat is not working, and
it almost goes into like disaster movie territory kind of thing. Yeah,
right? but again, like we don't want to trivialize what the Mardini sisters went through,
because their story is
or any
incredible.
of the people that have crossed the sea for a better life, and what they're willing, like the risk of saying, okay, I am willing to possibly die at sea in order to have a better life, and because I feel that my home country is a worse place to be in, is a very compelling and powerful idea to have a platform to show other people, right? And you don't want to take that away from them. It's just how the movie is made that we're being more critical of, because it feels like it is kind of a more conventional commercial approach to material that is inspiring, but kind of, again, is just very emotionally manipulative and sometimes derivative in how it kind of hits you over the head time and time again of like how serious this is. It is serious. You don't need to continually explain through the triumphant music or sequences that kind of feel like there are certain caricatures or tropes that you would find along the way.
It's really heavy-handed dialogue or ADR we mentioned, like little things like that really needs to drive home to the person watching that like this is how people treat them, or this is what they went through, which again I agree with you is incredibly important and inspiring, and their story deserves to be known and told. It's just, I agree with you in the filmmaking, like at times you go, oh, okay, this is generally well made. It's just like I don't know if it does anything extraordinary. And I think the whole sports angle of it, I agree with you, feels like a little tacked on, and
it feels like an epilogue in a way.
Yeah, and it's just the movie is long as well, probably a little too long. But the whole Olympic swimming angle feels like it's just a reason to tell their story and make their story not necessarily feel more important than other refugee stories, but it's the reason why theirs is being told, because it has that commercial appeal of like she competed in 2 Olympics on the refugee team.
There's a moment in this movie that I thought actually was really like a strong piece of writing that comes in later, where her German coach, who's played by the actor who was in Army of the Dead, the Zack Snyder movie, and he also directed Army of Thieves, the prequel spin-off film, where Usara is talking about not wanting to be basically like the equivalent of a diversity hire and wanting to represent Syria still, and wanting to be there on her own merit and not seem like a charity case. And I think that moment actually has some bite to it and is saying something really profound and powerful and calling out the Olympics, but it comes so late in the film, and
it's
by the time
glossed over.
And by the time you get to that moment, it just kind of feels like it's too little too late, and like it couldn't really completely decide what lane to swim in, you know, like it's like, does it want to be both sort of a powerful sort of platform to explore the refugee crisis that's still going on? Does it want to be
an inspirational sports movie,
conventional kind of Rocky-esque storyline that's, but obviously true? And then, on top of that, you have kind of the dynamic between the sisters, which is also, like
played by real life sisters.
Yeah, too. And I think that like that is interesting, and having 2 real sisters kind of play off of each other, and their chemistry's there, and like they have a natural sort of on-screen presence together.
I agree.
And that can even be hard to do sometimes. Just because you're related doesn't necessarily mean that translates on the screen. I mean, look at Idris Elba talking about how his daughter tried to audition for the role in Beast, and like apparently she didn't get cast because she didn't have good chemistry with him on screen. And he was saying like they had a bit of a sort of falling out after that. So.
I mean, no one should expect anything. That's nepotism. But like, I agree that they're both solid. Like, again,
and we should say it's Manal and Natalie Issa, who play the sisters, and it's directed by Sally El-Husani. So like it's one of those films where it's like there's a lot of like interesting things going on, and I like the idea that it doesn't necessarily cast actors that you're familiar with. Because then
it could have gotten into some real like Hollywood kind of like
and maybe you bring that kind of sort of attachment to a film like this, where you're learning about these characters on their own merits and the story on its own, and I think that makes it a little bit more compelling and authentic in a lot of ways, where this could have easily also been a very Hollywoodized film. Like if this was made in like the 90s or early 2000s, if the story took place then, they would have gotten whoever the big names were at the time to play the sisters, and probably wouldn't have been properly cast. It would have probably even been whitewashed
a little bit.
So like it is very sensitive to those things, and you have to appreciate that. But overall, I think it's a film that is kind of a middle brow movie that will be released on Netflix, and unless you are actually actively seeking it out or hear about it through a review, it's not a film that will necessarily stand out, I don't think, either.
I completely agree. Again, like I'll probably tell my mom to watch this movie, so I think I mean that as a compliment. Really, like I genuinely do. Because like there are a lot of great movies that I like that I would not suggest to my parents, right? So
and I like movies.
It's just like there's a spectrum there, and I feel like all types of movies should exist, and I don't. There are more interesting and stylistic and important movies that deal with similar subject matter, but I mean sometimes just an easily digestible kind of version of that is fine, and that's kind of like the word that I keep using. It's totally fine. And like I have there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. It's very safe, and I do think that some of like, again, the sports stuff just feels really tacked on and feels very like pushing the Olympics a little bit as like, look at this good thing we did, like what you were saying.
But also
And
it is
that,
trying to be a little bit critical of it, but like the critical kind of quality almost backs off a little bit at the end.
Because they wanted to use all their logos and everything, so you got to think that they're not going to be too critical of that or like anything, because she backs off pretty quickly and goes, no, I want to, and I understand
the support of her sister, right, saying like, take this opportunity.
And you should, if they have this opportunity to represent all the refugees that are
well, even Sarah's arc though, like her arc, I think, is quite compelling when we see her become, you know, a political activist and trying to help those that, you know, having the experience that she did. And, you know, like there is one actually really compelling shot of when they first get to, you know, the beach in Greece, and, you know, they're taking their life preservers off, and there's just basically like this sea of life preservers. And again, like you have to appreciate that, like once they reach land, their journey is still not over.
Oh, totally.
You know, and you know, you don't know what, you know, these people had to do to survive, and like, you know, how long they have to kind of travel, and, you know, whether or not they get sent to camps or sent back to their
reunited
countries
with their families and stuff like that. And the movie does kind of gloss over a lot of that stuff. I mean, it
but it's very surface level
instead
of like diving deeper into you know, something that is more specific. It kind of feels like it just glides on the surface. And I know I'm using a lot of kind of, you know, comparisons to diving in water, but like it just kind of feels like your very traditional safe movie, where there were opportunities throughout this film where it could have kind of had like a sort of like one perspective, like with the Sarah character, going back to her for a second, her kind of arc kind of feels glossed over. Like there's not really,
especially in the latter bit of the movie when it focuses more on the sports stuff. And
then, you know, like a lot of these films, there's a postscript. And with the postscript,
I feel like you could have put all of the Olympic stuff in a postscript. Like you could have just been like, this is what she went on to do. Like you didn't necessarily have to have that in there.
And she's facing, you know, as it said, 20 years in prison for her activism. And it's just like that's a really powerful like statement that's been brought up. And it's like, why wasn't that a part of this movie? You know, like that would have been an interesting story on its own. And again, like they kind of just, it's more Yrsa's story than it is Sarah's ultimately. But at the beginning, it kind of really emphasizes that it's both of their stories. And then kind of halfway through, it's like, no, it's really, you know, Yrsa.
Because she's competing in the Olympics. Because that's the, you know.
And even like their father having wanted to be a swimmer, but kind of having to give that up and join the army. And then, you know, like even that is kind of like only just touched upon, where it's like, are you really living your own dream, or are you basically your own father's, you know, aspirations? You know, and that could have been something interesting, but it's never really fully explored.
I agree with you on all points. The dog agrees as well. I'm gonna give the movie a 3. I think that is being a little generous, but like I really do think that, you know, it's totally okay, and my mom would enjoy it.
It's a good kind of middle of the road, safe opening night film. It plays well to kind of kick the festival off. It's slight but streamlined, so I'll give it a 3 as well. Nothing wrong with it. Just, you know, there's more compelling films about this topic going on in the world right now that we already referenced. I mean, I think a documentary on this would have been more interesting.
Doesn't that happen a lot though when we watch these kind of movies?
And not that documentaries it has to be a documentary either. You know, like it still can be a great narrative film.
I agree, but then when you watch something, a lot of inspirational sports movies, I go, this would have been more interesting if you had all the real people involved and did a doc on it or something like that. Like I thought the same thing about King Richard. I thought,
or even do kind of like a hybrid thing where like there are some movies where you kind of create a narrative version around the real people. You know, like to reenact sequences that is kind of like a documentary drama, right?
There just could have been more interesting ways to approach the material. And unfortunately, you know, it's just fine. But that's okay. Thank you all for listening. We really, really do appreciate it. This is just the beginning of all of our TIFF content, as we are swarmed by pigeons here in the Grange Park. I don't know what they think. Like, do they think we have food? Is like, you guys are just eating like rocks off the ground? Anyways, Untitled Movie reviews on podcast services, Untitled Movie Podcast on YouTube. Untitled_movies on Letterboxd is going to be your one-stop shop for everything. Over the next 2 weeks or so, we'll be posting all of our TIFF reviews. So probably during the festival, after the festival, we're going to have tons of stuff. So keep it locked right here. Follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And you can find more of my work at rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on all the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Canada is colder than Germany.
Oh, yeah.